Good evening and welcome to this special Tuesday night edition of the People Show with your host and facilitator, Mark Wallace. I am glad to be here with you again on this special day on intellectualradio.com, Instagram, Facebook, and on YouTube. We are celebrating and commemorating the life, the legacy, and the birth of Harold Washington, the first Black mayor elected in 1983. And I have the privilege of talking with a host of members of his campaign, and we're going to be talking with members of the administration who can give us the insight of what it was like to be with Harold Washington during the campaign and certainly with him during his administration. I came to the city of Chicago in November 18th of 1985, just 2 years prior to his death and 2 years into the middle of his first term. I came here from a small town, a black town in Miami, Florida called Richmond Heights. Knew very little about Chicago and came here for a job opportunity and quickly learned about what was happening politically here, because every night that I would go home and watch the news and turn on the news, there was some battle that was going on between Harold Washington, who was the then mayor, and these two characters named Ed Verdoliak and Ed Burke, who were aldermen of the city of Chicago at that time. But what was striking to me is that every time, and it seemed like he was in a lawsuit with him about something, seemed like it was every day. But what was striking to me was every time that they were in this lawsuit, Harold Washington would come out on top, beating Ed Verdoliak and Ed Burke. And I quickly became captured by this, and it was like running home every night to watch a sporting event, but it was to watch what was going on between Harold Washington and these two characters. I was pretty apolitical at that time, although I had voted in elections. I had probably voted in a couple of elections. I was only 25 years of age when I came here. The very first election that I voted in was the presidential election for Jimmy Carter when I was 18 years of age. And then moved to and voted for him again when he ran for election, and unfortunately he lost that election. But I came to Chicago and was quickly captivated by the personality and the person of Harold Washington. And I can say today that there has not been another person in politics, whether it be locally or nationally, that has impacted my life in terms of public service and what it means to be a citizen and what it means to be an engaged citizen than Harold Washington. I spent a lot of time watching and reading about him, and certainly modeling any activity that I am involved in behind the character and the conscience and the courage of the one Harold Washington. And so joining me to talk about this, and we're going to talk about the campaign of Harold Washington, and joining me now is going to be Jane Ramsey, Bob Starks, and Zenobia Johnson Black. And of course, who is going to be with us throughout the program is Lois Dean Walker, who is now the president of the Harold Washington Legacy Committee, who brought these panelists together to share with us this information. Now, many people may not know today about Harold Washington, who he was, and really what he meant. It's been 37 years since he passed. He passed on November the 25th of 1987. And I was just doing a little reflecting that he was born on April the 15th, 1922. So he was born right around the High Holy Days. And he went on home to be with the Lord around Thanksgiving. In fact, the day before Thanksgiving of 1987. And so we are going to share and learn a whole lot about Harold Washington from the people who are on with me now. So I'm going to bring them on to the stage right now. And we have Zenobia Johnson Black, who is with us. And I'm looking for my other guest here. Bob Stocks is here.
Yep.
And thank you all for being here with me today. So thank you so much for being on the program. Um, and I think we can't see Zenobia, so Zenobia's camera is out. Zenobia was director of volunteers, the Harold Washington campaign in 1983. And we have Jane Ramsey and Robert Starks. Thank you very much. And then I'm going to bring in the president of the Harold Washington Legacy Committee, and that is Lois Dean Walker, who put all of this together. Hey, Lois Dean.
Hey there. Hey, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Jane. Hi, Zenobia.
Hey, Justine.
All right. So I want to start out by, I want to play a little clip. I have quite a few clips. I don't know that we'll get through all of them, but I have quite a few clips of Harold Washington and doing a couple of interviews. In the one interview that he did, some of the clips that we're going to see is an interview that he sat down with Joel Daley 2 weeks prior to his unfortunately untimely death, that he did this with Joel Daley. And I want to play a couple of these clips and then get your thoughts about it.
The trouble with Chicago, it is retarded. Other cities have moved away from us. Our legacy is one of clout, and we still think of it, and it's killing us. We've got to get away from it. And we've got to stop imposing that kind of a truncated thinking on the leaders. This leader's not going to buy it because he knows that's not the way to run things. But that is the way to do it through that process. Look at the Educational Summit. Watch as this whole parent council matter unfolds, and you will see my idea about how cities should be run in terms of solving serious problems. That's the legacy I want to leave. It goes without saying I want an open government. I want institutions that work. I want people to come together and work cooperatively and interdependently with each other and all those kinds of things. But fundamentally and basically, you've got to get people into an idea of working together through an ordered system of give and take.
So he brought them into the process, is your legacy.
Yes.
They're concerned about this city. They know that this country is in the throes of a conservative reaction with some hate syndromes moving, and they're very much concerned. So they look to this city for hope. And when we emerged as the leader and the winner of the Democratic primary, they thought they saw that hope because we had a reputation here of being mired down in controversy.
Those are just a couple of the clips, and that last clip was actually the clip that he had after he had won the primary, and he was in a debate with Bernard Epton, who was running as then the Republican nominee. So I want to get your thoughts on the campaign and give us a little background on what that was like coming up. Lois Dean, we're going to start with you.
Okay. I can start from where I came into the picture. I had, done passing flyers for different politicians during my teen years and all of that, but never something, because I really didn't know, what actually was going on. But the day I was actually working for Johnson Products Company, George Johnson on 87th and Dan Ryan, and Bill Berry was my boss. I was his executive assistant, and he came running in the door and said, "We're going to have a Black mayor." And so I just looked at him because, that was never something that was supposed to be said and or had. And so from that day on, he had just left the group at the, I believe it was the Hyatt out on in Hyde Park at that time, and the announcement had been made. And so he said that this is what we're going to do. And from that day on, we went into full mode to elect Harold as the mayor. President CEO George Johnson loaned about 16 of us to the Harold Washington campaign for mayor. And from there we went on. We did not have a dime. We didn't have a pencil. We didn't have a piece of paper. Nobody would give us any credit. And so it was up to the community that we were going to elect this first Black mayor. And that's how I got involved in all of this. It went on from day to day, and then into the his second term. And now here I am
All right.
as the president, 43 years later, as the president of the Harold Washington Legacy Committee, trying to make sure that his name is remembered, and what he did is remembered, that impacted the entire country, and at that particular time the world, because Africa was hitting drums saying Harold Washington was the mayor. And so his impact, the impact of his election, led to many other things, and all the way to the House, of to the president. And so I just look and sit here today, that now we're like, everything that we worked so hard for 65 years is now being turned back around. And I just wonder, what would he say today? What would happen if he had been able to continue the path that he was charting for the rest of us.
Well, he would be today, he would be 103 years old if he was still with us.
Yes.
Looking back on the time, I'm 64 years of age, and it was 64 years of age that Harold Washington made his transition. And so I was reflecting and doing some of the, juxtaposing of those dates and those years. And so when I came to Chicago, I was 25 years old, and I always say a whole lot of black hair ago.
Look at me.
Kid.
Look at me. This was black.
I'm sure. So let's hear from Jane Ramsey. What was your involvement with the campaign?
So I was when Harold announced, and before, I was the executive director of a not-for-profit called the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs, which is a non-religious civil rights organization. We partnering with community organizations all over Chicago, but particularly in the Black and Latinx communities on issues to tackle racism and economic inequities. And I first met Harold. I was co-chair of a large coalition called the Illinois Coalition Against Reagan Economics, which came together when Reagan was elected and started cutting all of our safety net, food programs and all of the programs that we the important programs for the city. And this Congressman, Harold Washington, came to speak with us. And I was just blown away, as everybody was, by his vision, by his warmth, by his charisma, by his humor. So when and I started hearing that he was a possible candidate. So I, like everybody else, jumped in and said, what can I do? And I was in the campaign. I was a coordinator of a ward on the north side, as well as the coordinator of the we put together a Jewish voters for Harold. So in the campaign, what was wonderful was the excitement and the vibrancy of people coming together all over Chicago, communities. Excited because Harold had a vision, and he represented a coming together of a coalition, a coalition that had been growing, pushing back against the Chicago machine for 2 decades. So we were all part of that, and he represented hope. So I was, so that was my entree when I met Bob and Zenobia and Lois Steen. And for us, and what it did was it gave us that vision. And I think today, by the way, I think Harold would say, fight on. This is a fight of our lifetime. We know what we represent. We represent values of a better world and an equitable world for all people. And we can't be tired, and we can't be distracted. And so I just say the other thing. So Harold approached all of us to come into City Hall, right? You wanted everybody to come in, and I was happy doing what I partnering with him and with the coalition. But I did finally come in a year before his death as director of community relations for the office of the mayor, because it was hard to turn him down. And in that role, my role was to try to connect community groups to the administration in the vision that Harold wanted. How could we all work together? And that was my role within the administration. But I think in one of the clips that he was talking about how people come together and the importance of bringing people together. And he empowered groups of people who had never had access to City Hall before. He represented fighting the old patronage system and fighting the unethical City Hall, but he also represented opportunity for communities to have access to City Hall, to be part of decision making, and created the Women's Commission and the Latino Commission and the Immigrant and Refugees Commission, the LGBTQ Commission, and it gave giving every side of Chicago a meaningful voice and empowered to be part of City Hall. So I felt I continue to feel very blessed, because that coalition that Harold built and brought together, we're still together. We remember the people that we've lost, but there is so much vision still, and I'm grateful to the Legacy Committee that we can, and importantly, bring to young people Harold's vision of how do we make the world a better place, and what is each of our responsibility.
Here's another clip of Harold talking about the Women's Commission and how he brought people together. And in each of these clips that I play, and certainly I've viewed them over and over and over again, to see someone who was very sincere and deliberate about what it is that he wanted to do. There was never a question in anything that he wanted to do, and he dealt with it head on. He was not your typical politician who would answer a question that was not asked. He would answer a question. You might not have, they may not have liked the answer, but he answered the question that they asked. Let's take a look.
So my commitment to the Women's Council is the same as my commitment to the Hispanic Council. I promoted it. I helped bring it into being. We brought it to fruition. We have put good people on it. We have funded it. Now we're going to make certain that they have open sesame so that they can not only carry on their own programs, but bird dog this administration in the process.
So he never ran from it, right? He said what he was going to do, and he went forward with it. And he challenged people that, watch what we do and to ask serious questions. And that was one of the things that I saw, and we didn't get a chance to bring that one. But there was one thing that he always said, is that people should ask critical questions of their political representatives, that representatives should not be afraid to respond to the public, because it's the public who they are supposed to be hearing from in order to deal with things. And so I always appreciate that about Harold, in that even though I never had a chance to meet him, and I tell people I never had that privilege to meet him, but I felt like this was somebody that I absolutely knew, and that somebody who had me in mind in his representation as mayor. Let me move on to hear from the other two panelists that are here. Zenobia Black, we're going to hear from you. What was your involvement, and how did you get involved with the campaign?
Well, I was in from the ground floor because of Renault Robinson, and Tim and I, my late husband, Timuel Black, chaired a fundraiser for the African American Patrolmen's League. Then Renault said, "This is the real deal. We're trying to get Harold to run." So actually the first meeting of the Boycott of Chicago Fest was in my living room. When the day before Harold announced, I knew, he was going to announce and where and everything. I was there. And I said to Harold, well, I'll give you 8 hours a day. He said, you give me 16 and we got a deal. But we had a myriad of groups. We had lawyers for Harold, teachers for Harold, winos for Harold.
Mm-hmm.
We had, we had 10,000 volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just amazing. When I was in the campaign office, one of the press guys said to me, well, people are so crazy.
Charles Chuck Green.
I said, this is not just an election. This is a crusade. And it was.
Yes.
Okay.
So it was thrilling. It was exciting. My husband was part of Harold's Kitchen Cabinet. It was just wonderful. And because of my position, I know people I don't even know.
Right.
Because so many people were, active volunteering for the campaign. It was wonderful.
All right, well, I want to hear from Bob Starks, and then I want for you all to kind of paint the picture for the audience, and certainly for me, because I was not around in 1983. Harold Washington actually ran for mayor, I believe it was in 1977, and lost that campaign in 1977. And so paint the picture as to why was it Harold who lost that election, and was it that election that gave, I guess, rise to him becoming the candidate for in 1983? How that came about?
The progressives supported Jane Byrne, but she turned out to be a member of the cabal she would describe and dismiss. So given that pullback from Jane Byrne, then Harold had a pathway, a road to follow to become mayor. Because Jane Byrne, a vote for Jane Byrne was actually a vote against the machine. Mm-hmm. And when she was losing favor because she joined with the hateful, what is it, 29?
29.
Yeah, the hateful 29. She lost her support. In fact, when she was elected, she called Tim to thank him and ask him what he wanted for her support. He says he wanted a Black superintendent of schools and a Black superintendent of police. She said, no, Tim, what do you want? And he said, I want a Black superintendent of schools and a Black superintendent of the police department. So, she pretty much adiosed the Black community.
All right, Bob Starks.
Yes, sir. Well, give me a minute. Let me go way back. I met Harold when I was working for the Chicago Urban League in 1969. And when I went over from the Urban League to Northeastern Illinois University to teach, I invited Harold actually every semester, because I was teaching political science, and I would ask him. He was in the House at the time, Illinois House, and he would come over, he and Sam Patch, and lecture to my class. And some of my students fell in love with him and became, help him on his campaigns and in his office in the state legislature. So we were close, even back as far as 1969. So as Zenobia referenced, the first major act was Jesse Jackson calling for the boycott of Chicago Fest. And that set off a whole chain of action that led to Harold's election. But before that, in 1977, Harold ran.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Oh, God. And Harold ran and lost. I went to work in Hyde Park with Josie Childs. That's when I first met Josie, working on Harold's campaign. And so Josie and I were heartbroken, but we were glad that Harold carried actually 5 different wards in the city of Chicago, on the south side and one or two on the west side. And so we were quite happy about that. And then in 1983, it was 82. It was 83. We had a meeting at Robert's Motel in which Lou Palmer had called, and Lou called it to force Harold to make a decision. Are you going to run? And Harold kept it, his people knew he was going to run, but they didn't tell us. So the next day, he actually announced that he was going to run. And of course, we all went to the restaurant in Hyde Park, and where he made his announcement that he was running. And from that point on, we became very active. And of course, at that meeting at the Roberts Motel, Al Sampson said, well, we should have 2 different campaign operations. And everybody looked at him and said, what are you talking about? He said, look, we need a downtown major office, but we also need one in the community. So he said, well, what are we going to call this? And he said, well, let's call it the people's side of the town. And someone said, why don't we call it the Task Force for Black Political Empowerment? And they said, well, who's going to run it? And everybody looked at me and said, Bob. So every Tuesday night, throughout the campaign, all the way up to 4 or 5 years later, we met every Tuesday night in the basement at the Center for Inner City Studies. We helped Harold get elected, as well as giving Danny Davis, Bobby Rush, Lou Jones. We helped many people, all the way up to Barack Obama running for Senate and for president. So Harold's election, as Jane said, had everybody in there. We had, teachers for Harold, singers for Harold. I mean, you can name it. It was one of the largest turnouts for African Americans in the city of Chicago, in the history of Chicago. And of course, Mercedes Millett, who was a part of our team, came up with what she called the 80-80 plan. 80% of Black people registered to vote, and 80% of Blacks voting for Harold. And we surpassed both of those. Okay. Yep.
We got a couple of minutes left on this first segment, but tell me about what was the energy like in the very beginning? Was the energy as high then? Were you as confident at the very beginning when he decided to run and when this campaign? Give us a little feedback on what was.
The level was high because Jane and Zenobia said people were disappointed with Jane Byrne. She had done a lot of things. We had voted for her because she is alternative to the machine. Mm-hmm. But then after she got elected, she did some crazy things.
She turned about face.
2 seconds, she made a deal with the mob.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to go back, Bob, and say, yes, while our energy was high, it did not peak to be as high as it became because every day it was, half the people were still with her. Half didn't know what the other fourth didn't know what they were going to do, and then the other 3/3 were here. And so what I say and what I know, and you all probably will remember, what piqued the high interest. Like you said, Mark, every night you'd watch television and there he was. We didn't have any money for the commercials, but the news people gave Harold the floor every night.
So and the radio. Remember, we had radio.
So there was Lou Palmer on the black radio. Right. There was the white news with Harold on there talking, using big words, and people coming every day saying, "Did you hear what he said last night?" But the day that peaked, people didn't think that he could do it until we had that first rally at the University of Illinois over there on the west side, and we had I remembered this number. It cost $8,932.23, and the stadium wanted every penny before we could set foot in there, and we didn't, and they wouldn't take a credit card or a check. They wanted every penny. And so when it was standing room only, and that night, it was a Sunday night, when the news came on and showed us in the streets and in the place that Tuesday, and then that Monday night, Conrad World, Vince Bakeman, in the middle of the night, painted the streets blue. Signs everywhere. When everybody woke up on Tuesday morning, that's when we peaked. And it went on from there, and that's how we got the confidence that we're going to win this thing.
And then we started seeing the buttons everywhere.
And
there was the debate.
The second batch of buttons, they broke the window to my car. I had to pick them up at the button farm. They broke my window. They stole the buttons, and they sold them at 51st and Lake Park Shopping Center for $1 piece.
The first button was a sticker. It was a blue sticker. The second button was a little tin thing that pinned over the top of your shirt, and then it came with the button with a stick in it.
Tell them who invented and who put the button together.
Helen Schiller.
And
they designed it.
That should have been a great indication if somebody was breaking into somebody's car to steal some campaign buttons. That was a great indicator.
And then we started seeing these blue buttons every community, all kinds of folks,
all over the city.
That was a sign. You just knew.
Now every single campaign, everything is about a button. But it started at the Harold Washington campaign.
It started its own industry. I mean, people did independent buttons.
And
one quick story. In my house, I had a bucket of buttons right at the door, and I didn't realize that my son, who was at that time about 6 years old, going to Ancona in Hyde Park, and a lady, one of his friend's mother said, "Well, Bob, me and my husband voted for Harold." And I said, "Well, great." She said, "We did it because of our son." And I said, "Because of your son?" She said, "My son said every morning, Bobby, my son, would stand at the door and give buttons, Harold Washington buttons, to the kids and tell them, go vote for Harold Washington. Tell your parents to vote for Harold Washington." And that's how she got involved. I didn't realize he was doing this, but he saw me taking buttons out of the bucket and passing them out. So he did the same thing. And I didn't know about it until the end of the election. It's really
That's
all right. We're going to have to move along. We're a little bit over time. I want to thank each one of you, Robert Stark, Zenobia Black, and Jane Ramsey. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And we are celebrating and commemorating Harold Washington. Thank you all so much for coming on to the program. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next panel, and we have coming on with us, and these people served in the administration: Jackie Grimshaw, Lucille Dobbins, and and of course, we're going to have Eddie Reed if he is here. So I want to thank you all for coming on the program, and hopefully we'll see you all again. So let me bring on Jackie Grimshaw. Welcome to the program. And,
hello, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And Lucille Dobbins, welcome to the program.
Okay.
Lucille, how are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Eddie Reed.
Hello.
Okay. All right. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Thank you so much for being here. And Jackie, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
You all worked in the administration, and I want to play a couple of clips. This is an interview that was done in the middle of his campaign. I want to play a couple of the clips that came from when he did his first interview. I think this was when he was talking about the Board of Education. This one struck me of what he said about the Board of Education when there was a question that was raised about why he was so apathetic about managing the Board of Education. This was his response.
Let me dispel this laid-back position concept. I'm not laid back any place. First of all, I have made it absolutely clear that the responsibility of a mayor or any other executive official is not to involve himself into the administration of a school system, curricula, etc. That's not the purview of a politician, and you don't want that. The problem in the past in this city is that previous mayors have practically run the public school system, and they have used that system as a market for bond merchants, craft unionists, and contractors. We know that. It's legend. I happen to be the first mayor in 60 years who bothered to even attend a public school system.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that Harold Washington, who had this conviction that the mayor should not be involved with the running of the school board, and since his passing, it has become exactly what he just described?
Well,
Jackie?
the role, what he was describing is the role of the chief executive, and that is to make decisions, set policy, etc. It's not to be an operations manager. I mean, you have other people to operate and implement the decisions that he made, that any chief executive would make. And so that was a point he was making, and that's the way it should be. He was absolutely right.
Lucille?
That is correct.
So Jackie, what was your role in the campaign, or not in the campaign, but certainly in the administration?
I was director of the mayor's office of intergovernmental affairs. That's the office that has responsibility for all of the governments that are coterminous with the city of Chicago. So that meant I had to deal with the 2129 in city council, the General Assembly, as well as our delegation and the Congress. In addition to that, all of those boards that you were just talking about, the Chicago Board of Education, the City Colleges Board, CHA Board, RTA Board, CTA Board, all of those, Park District Board, all of those boards and commissions that are part of the city. I had the responsibility, again, of taking his policies to those chief operating officers to make sure they knew what he wanted to see and how he wanted the people of the city of Chicago to be serviced. But my job was not to run those things. My job was only to communicate his message to those decision makers.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of you having to deal with them with what was that like, and what did Harold? How did he arm you, and what did he tell you in terms of you having to deal with, which was some great, tremendous opposition going in?
Yeah. Well, really, my only problem child was the city council. All those other boards and commissions are much more amenable to carrying out Harold's wishes. But we had Harold was very, I guess you could say, collaborative. So, there was nothing that we did that was just me and him. It was he would hear from the other deputy mayors in terms of their various positions. And in fact, we had a planning agenda before, particularly the city council. I'm sorry, the General Assembly and the Congress, of those things that people needed in their departments or policy changes they wanted to see, or existing policies that were challenges or impediments and so forth. So we would hear from all of the leaders of the various uh, areas of the government. And once we heard that, then, a smaller group of particularly mayor's office staff would figure out which policies to go for, which policies to challenge, and so forth. And then that was my marching order as I went to the city council, the General Assembly, or the Congress.
Here's Harold talking about the obstruction that you faced
It's not frustrating.
from the.
It's criminal. I'm not the sufferer. The people are. It won't hurt me one bit. It'll just mean more young boys and girls will be endangered. More communities will be unstable. More people will be unhappy, and more mothers will cry at night about the loss of their young boys. That's what disturbs me. And we will continue. We won't get frustrated. I'm used to controversy, born into it, raised into it, like other people are. One who goes into politics expects it.
You're also used to winning.
And will continue to do so. One expects controversy. It doesn't particularly bother you, although some of it's useless. Everywhere you go in politics, you see controversy. When I was in the General Assembly, we had it. When I was in the Congress, it was there. The difference between Chicago Council and these other forms and places of government is that you don't find in those places irresponsible people like the leader of the 29 who have no desire to do anything but destroy and to try to prevent progress. You don't find that in other places. You find it here in Chicago. And I guess to a certain extent, that's why Chicago is different. Over the years, with its monolithic, ruthless form of government, it has bred a certain type of politician, not all, but too many, who simply have no respect for the public coffers, no respect for public policy, if they know what it means, and whose only attitude is, where's mine? And that's really what we're up against in this city.
Yep. That is absolutely right. Where's mine?
Yeah, but and I think that with that kind of with his kind of response. Now, this was right during the time that I came to Chicago that he actually did that interview. He was right in the middle of his campaign, and as I said, I came from Miami, Florida. We had not heard about Harold Washington down in that part of the country, so we had not really heard about what had taken place in Chicago. And so when I got to Chicago in 1985, as a 25-year-old, and as I said, I quickly became attracted to them, to this. And then, of course, going on, Harold had an impact on many of us that made us, as Black young men, as Black people, have a sense of pride of being as a Black person at that time. And I don't think that was just a one-off. I think that was across the communities, across the city of Chicago. And certainly if I felt that as somebody newly coming into the city of Chicago, that had to be pervasive through the people who had been a part of the campaign and who had been a part of that first election, and then gearing up, going towards that second election. I cast the most proud casting of a ballot when I voted for Harold Washington in 1987. I was at the poll at 7 o'clock in the morning. I lived at 1120 North LaSalle. Bert Nateris was my older person at the time. And so I was excited to get up early in the morning and go cast that ballot. It was the most proud ballot that I have ever casted in my being involved with politics. Lucille Dobbins, tell us what your involvement in the administration was.
Wow.
Wow.
What was your role, Lucille? What was your title?
My first title at the city of Chicago was the first deputy commissioner of the Department of Planning. And my job was to make sure that we did development in the Black community. You know that shopping center on 95th and Stony Island? That was done by Harold, yours truly, under Harold Washington. That development on 71st and Jeffrey was done by Harold Washington, yours truly.
Okay.
The North Loop development was done by Harold Washington, of which one of those most famous things was the Drake Hotel downtown, done by my mayor, Harold Washington.
So you were the deputy commissioner of the planning department.
Yes, I was. I was the first deputy commissioner of the planning department. I did the first tax increment financing bonds for the city of Chicago ever done in this city under my mayor, Harold Washington.
Lucille, did you also do the 55th and Dan Ryan development as well?
55th and Dan Ryan.
Garfield Boulevard and a Dan Ryan.
Garfield Boulevard and Dan Ryan. I'm trying to think. I have to think back on that, Jackie.
Yeah. I think
I'm getting old.
I know it was Harold. Maybe it was not you in the planning department, but it was definitely done under Harold.
Right. We tried to do all of our stuff under Harold when I was in the planning department to make sure that we went into the Black community to get all of those developments done then. Period. We did that North redevelopment plan downtown, which was our first tax increment financing plan. And then I went to the mayor and told him, look, okay, we got this tax increment financing plan downtown. We can take this plan to the various communities, our communities, to do this tax increment financing projects in our communities. Yes, ma'am.
So speaking of the TIF, how did the TIFs come about? Because TIFs right now are completely misused and misapplied. But how did that program come to fruition? Whose brainchild were?
That was Harold's brainchild through my advice. Because when we first did our first tax increment financing, we did it downtown in a 9-block area downtown. And once we did that successfully, I went to the mayor and I said to him, we can do this in the neighborhoods. Smaller projects, but we can do this tax increment financing in the neighborhoods. And that's when we did the one on 95th and Stony Island, that development project where they got all of, they got Jewel and everybody there on 95th Street in Stony Island. We did that. After we did that first development project downtown, then we went to 71st and Jeffrey. Then we went over there on 79th and Jesus, my memory's shot me down. 79th and Eberhard. And we went all over the city in the communities to do tax increment financing. Once we did that one downtown in that 9-block area, and that's when we got the Drake Hotel down there in that project.
So was the TIF was TIF designed? So originally it was not designed for blighted communities. If I'm hearing what you're saying, that you did it downtown first, but then you
Took
spread
that
it.
model. We then took that model to the communities in the city. Yes, we did.
Now, so, of course, we have Brandon Johnson, who is the mayor now, and there has been a whole lot of controversy about migrants. And people have asked the question as to what would Harold have done as it relates to the migrants. Now, I'm going to play a clip, and then I want to get your input and get your thoughts on what you think that Harold would have done. I know what I think that he would do based on what he says. Let's listen to what he says about Hispanics.
And I say one of the problems with the city, which I must deal with immediately, is the jaundiced eye of the media. I would assume that that would be one of the most vivid aspects of this administration. How can you overlook the president of the school board? How can you overlook the president of the Board of Health? How can you overlook Ms. Maria Cerda, who heads up the Mayor's Office of Employment Training? How can you overlook Ben Reyes, who is one of my liaisons? How can you overlook the Hispanic Council, which is not only comprised of Hispanics, but also operate in terms of executive? How can you overlook the fact that we've increased the amount of dollars going into the Hispanic community from a minuscule 1% of community development block grant funds to almost 10-12% now? How can you overlook the fact that when we came into office, Hispanics represented less than 1% of the decision-making positions and now have 11? It's just amazing that that could be. Then how could they overlook, for example, the fact that we have been in the forefront of the drive to make certain, one, that Hispanics had adequate representation in city council?
You and the media
If the media is on that kick, then we got a real problem in this city. Manifest, I think they're quite obvious, not only in terms of philosophy, which says that we must continue to fight to make certain that Hispanics adequately represented in the council, as we are doing against the opposition of the 29, but in terms of projects undertaken, for example, concerning ourselves about Hispanic neighborhoods, Hispanic representation. For example, we have a Hispanic council for the first time in the history of the city, Hispanics in conspicuous positions, president of the school board, president of the Board of Health, heading up the Mayor's Office of Employment and Training, first and second deputies in many positions, chief liaison in my own office. These positions were never available to Hispanics, never available to women, seldom if ever available to blacks in this city.
So, Jackie, if that's the way that the mayor thought and his intentions about the inclusion of Hispanics, why is there so much pushback against this mayor in terms of doing what is the appropriate and human and decent thing about the migrants that were basically forced upon us as a political stunt by some other politician?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. It was a whole different kind of circumstance. I mean, at that point in time, Latinos were residents of the city of Chicago. They were about not quite a third of the population. And just like the African American communities, they had been shut out. And if you knew anything about Harold's policy was fairness, right? He was going to make the city fair no matter what. And he was going to make fairness fair. So his position was that people had been left out of government. They live here, they should have a voice, and he wanted to make sure that that happened. The pushback that Johnson is getting is, none of us knew the migrants were coming. It was like a surprise visit of hundreds of people at a time, thanks to that crazy governor down in Texas. So that was an emergency. That was a fire that was going on that had to be dealt with. So it was a scramble that you can't have people in the city of Chicago in the wintertime outside in shorts and flip-flops, right? So all of that had to be dealt with and had to be dealt with in a hurry. So, the pushback I guess, came not from the fact that that happened, but for the fact that a lot of the shelters ended up, there were shelters created, overnight for the Hispanics. Yet we've had African Americans sleeping on the streets here in Chicago for ages. And I think that's where the pushback is, that why can't you provide some housing for us? And so now that's starting to happen. Now I live here in Hyde Park, and the folks here in Hyde Park, are pushing back against one of those shelters and a no longer functioning motel that was used to house the migrants is empty, and folks, the mayor's decision was to put people who are without homes into those units, and the folks here, have this stereotype. They're pushing back. It's the assumption, because if you don't have a place to live, you're a criminal, right? Or you're going to lower the property values, etc. A lot of people are homeless because the rents are too damn high. You know, people are homeless because they've lost their jobs. People are homeless through a lot of times no fault of their own, but the circumstances that the society has created for them. And they need a place to live, just like the migrants who came here with their shorts and flip-flops in the middle of the wintertime needed a place to live. And I think as a community, as a society, we need to be more empathetic. We need to engage our other residents. These are residents of the city of Chicago, whether or not they have a home or not, right? And so the thing is that we don't ignore them. We don't leave them outside to freeze. If there's an opportunity to house them, I think we should do it. And like the thing is, the one thing that the city must do, they must not put these people in housing and then leave them. They need to provide supportive services, because a lot of times people who have been out of the mainstream, but a lot of people, this is a surprising thing I learned, that some of the people who are living in tents work every day, right? Earning money, but they don't earn enough money to afford the rent in Chicago. So we can't castigate a whole section of our community, right? We can't use our assumptions or our imagination as to who these people are, what they are. We need to get to know them. We need to say, Mr. Wallace, I'm glad you're here. Is there anything I can do for you? Right? That's the attitude we should have. We shouldn't be worried about property value. Hyde Park is going to have high property values. I don't care who's living here.
That's true.
It's just a matter of the society and where we are and real estate markets, etc. So anyway, I'm getting off my high horse. That's not what you asked me, but that's my response.
And Harold would have advocated that.
Yeah, and I believe, I'm one who I hate to ask a question into somebody's mind who's not here to answer for themselves, but I think that you all can certainly give some context to a particular situation as to how Harold handled things with different groups during that point, and what his certainly what his vision was of. And his compassion for helping people. I know I felt it, and I've never met the man, but I felt like this was somebody that I knew. I felt an affinity and a kinship to him. I know Brandon Johnson, or certainly knew him before he became mayor. He is not an effective communicator as Harold was, and he certainly does not have that. That ability to connect to people as Harold did. Harold had an ability to connect with people who didn't even like him, but they were compelled to once they heard what he said and the substance of what he said. It is very hard to reject.
That's correct. You are so correct. And he had the ability to be in touch with most people at every level in this city, not just the low income or the high income or the middle income, but all income levels. We had that ability. We had that ability to connect with Black folks and white folks. We had a tremendous ability to deal with most of the people in this city.
Well, and he talked about that. He talked about, about people, the everyday person. He talked about the everyday person being locked out, and it wasn't just for the people who are at the top of the heap. What about, the neighborhoods, right? It wasn't just about downtown. And it seems that we've shifted back to the emphasis on downtown, even though that we have these other little projects that are happening out in the community. But Harold spoke to that, and he spoke to those people who were the CEOs and said, look, you're going to get wealthy, you're going to continue to get wealthy, but we have to help those others who are not wealthy. We have to help those others who help you to be wealthy. And he was able to communicate that and to get people to think about approaching a more agrarian society differently than they thought. At least that's from what I could gather from his communications.
When we first did our TIF, tax increment financing, we did it downtown in a 9-block area of the city of Chicago downtown. After we did that, I went to the mayor and we had a big conversation about how we could take this financing opportunity to the communities, not just downtown, but to take it to our communities and develop and have our communities being developed in such a way that the Black community could benefit from our tax increment financing. And that's what we did. And that's how we got the increase in the Black community in many different communities, South Side and West Side of Chicago. And that's how those communities got developed. And those communities saw their increase in income coming into their community. They saw the increase in development. They saw the increase in different operations, different stores, whatever, coming in our community that would have never come there and Harold not done that. Harold and I.
All right. Listen, I want to thank you both, Jackie Grimshaw and Lucille Dobbins. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing with us, and certainly honoring Harold and his legacy on what would have been his 103rd birthday. Thank you both for sharing with us, and certainly thank you for your contribution on making a difference in this city and putting a mark on this city that has forever changed the city. Thank you both very much for that.
That's all right. And could I make one last statement about Harold?
Sure.
He was the most articulate, really articulate, brilliant mayor that we have ever had in this city. And I mean that to this day, Black, white, blue, or green. Harold was the most articulate, clearly understanding mayor that we have ever had in this city. Period.
Yeah, reporters had to go to the dictionary every time he had a press conference because he was words a lot.
Not only that, he used to say to the press people, "You want me to explain the word that I just said? You want me to to spell it for you?" We've never had a mayor like that. Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think that we have had as effective communicator like Harold in any form of government, whether it been on a local level or on the state level or the federal level. I don't know of a more effective communicator than Harold Washington. I want to thank you both for coming on. Jackie, thank you so much for being
My
here.
pleasure.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank
Bye
you,
bye,
Jackie.
Lucy.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, we're going to move to our next panel. Our next panel, we have Representative Arthur Turner, Sasha Dalton, and Barbara Norman are our next panel who are coming up to talk about some of the new initiatives on it. Art Turner, thank you very much for being here. Let me bring in, is Sasha Dalton here? Sasha is not here yet. And we'll bring on Barbara Norman. Barbara, welcome to the program. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for the invite. Can you hear me?
Yes,
can you guys hear me?
Hear you fine.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Art. Hi,
hello,
Madam President.
Hello.
I don't know what's
all
happening.
Right. So thank you all for coming in to, as we commemorate and honor and celebrate what would have been the 103rd birthday of Harold Washington. For the viewing audience here, we are celebrating what, in my opinion, someone who only served for 55 months, but it was the most impactful 55 months on so many different levels that I think it is important and certainly incumbent upon us to make sure that people who don't know that they do know, and for us to continue to remind ourselves of who Harold was. But I think that the best way to honor a person who was as impactful as Harold Washington, the best way to honor that person is to continue what it was that they did and what they taught us to move that forward. I think that much of that died off when he died, but I think that those of us who still remain are incumbent to do just that. Art Turner, why don't we start with, we're going to start with Dr. Barbara Norman. What was your involvement in the Harold Washington campaign or the administration?
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to let you know that I have members of our church who's also watching this and are very excited about your program. So we want to thank you. And I also want to thank our President, Lois Steen, for continuing to try to end a fight to keep his legacy alive. And believe me, it is a fight. I've been listening to you from your very beginning. So you asked me my beginning with Harold started really when I was in the high school. I was a senior at Dunbar High School, and one of our senior project was to interview one of the members in the community. And at that time, I was interviewing, you all remember Alderman Metcalf, remember Ralph? But in his office was that Harold Washington was one of the attorneys in the office who came over to meet with us and the student. And from that time on, from his personality, he embraced us, he encouraged us. And from that day on, from the age of 17, 18, I've been involved with Mayor Washington, his activities throughout his career at the time he was inaugurated and until the time he died. So I'm really grateful and thankful to share with this. And I know you say you're from Miami. You need to know a little bit about the dynamics of Chicago, the Ed Burke, the Ed Kelly, the Ed Bedoyak. They're still here. They're still alive and well. You talk about Mayor Brandon. We also coordinated and chaired his campaign. I'm really pleased at what he's trying to do. And as you said earlier, we had to help support and keep our people there who wants to help our people. So going back to Mayor Washington, during the time when we first met, and after I graduated and was went to school, my area has always been health, mothers and baby infant mortality. So when he became elected and ran for state office, even after he had ran for city office, he would always ask me to do his health legislation, or I was chair of the health, one of the co-chairs of the health legislation and his policy positions that he started as his new initiative. And Mark, I want to share another thing with you. For those of us who know, you may not know, Chicago in and of itself is divided into 77 community areas. Out of those 77 community areas, we have the 50 elected the persons that constitute the total population. Do you realize that same diagram of the 77 communities are basically the same then as they are today? So some of the problems they were dealing with then are still present today. You were asking earlier about Harold and some of the conflict with the council and with the people. It still exists today. It's probably more blatant now because folks are coming out of the closet and saying what they want to say. And Harold had the people under control. He knew, and the older persons knew, that if the people, if they went against Harold, he knew the people would rise up, and those older person elected people enjoyed their seat as elected officials. So my role in the campaign led through all from his state rep, health coalition, from his state, from senator, from when he's in the U.S. Congress. And I had just left the congressional caucus in, I think it was 82 when I went back to Ann Arbor. And then they called me to say the mayor's running for, Harold is running for mayor. So I said, well, I just did the health papers. And then I talked to the mayor. He says, well, the problem's the same. He said, change the title. Just change it from the 1st Congressional District and say this is the mayor's initiative for the city of Chicago. And you know that is true even of today. One of his primary concern, and what I really learned through all of my years working in politics, I'm a political animal. And during all the years, you ask the legacy, Mayor Washington, his commitment to the people and to his community is really part of the legacy. The first time in the history of the city of Chicago, he made health a priority. He would call public health the people's doctor. And from that position, he created the position. My position was the first deputy commissioner for the Chicago Department of Public Health. During his tenure, it was the first time that he had set up the program for the infant, we call it the Infant Mortality Reduction Initiative. At the time he was elected, Chicago had one of the highest infant deaths as some of your third world countries. And as that was one of the areas he targeted. He was trying to reduce the infant deaths down to 9 per 1,000 live births. He also established the AIDS HIV initiative program. We had never had that before. He set up a department for the STDs, or there's sexually transmitted disease that people think is gone. It's not gone, it still exists. He also put public health nursing in, and I'm glad with Mayor Johnson, we have nurses back into the school. Do you know when Harold Washington was mayor, he established a health service within the school. We even had to go to Congress because they had put in a complaint saying that he was promoting sexuality in the school by teaching young people about abstinence. However, they didn't realize from in those young people, that was the first time in high school they ever hadn't even seen a doctor. We had dentists in the high school. We had a nurse that was in there to evaluate the student. I can go on and on. We had the dentist, the WIC program, the mothers with the women and children. We had over 1 million clients. I had over 2,000 employees. We had 6 neighborhood health centers, 12 maternal, child, and infant clinic. We had 19 mental health centers, 3 adult centers. Now the other question is, like, where are we today? All of those are eradicated. I think right now, when our new commissioner, Dr. Ige, who I was also strongly supportive of and encouraged to be there, she is truly a public health physician. She shares Harold's ambition and initiative. And I know you said you didn't meet Harold personally, but you are meeting him. You're meeting him through us. We represent what he stood for, what he fought for, and his legacy. And I know Representative Turner can know that because he's like a nephew to me. He doesn't realize that. But yeah, all of you young folks, Harold, even with WBON, we can talk about Herbert Span, Melody. So we go back with you're smiling now, right? You're smiling. And then with Lou Palmer, I know our time is limited. I know I want to come back. You know, I'm raised in the church. I'm at Liberty Baptist Church, right down from you guys down at 55. But I had to get that shout out because my pastor and some of my members are also watching. So unless you want me to go on, I'm going to turn it over to, back to you and bounce it
We
over to
appreciate
Representative.
that. Thank you so much. Representative Turner, how you doing?
All I can tell you is I enjoy listening to Barbara. She's bringing back some stuff to me because it was a good time. It was a very interesting time, and they still call me Representative Turner. You know, I retired in 2010.
I know.
I served 30 years in the General Assembly, and Harold was part of the resurrection for me during my 30-year tenure. When I was first elected, and I should say that I start out by saying that I represented, and for the entire time, I've always represented the West Side of Chicago. I represent the community of Lawndale. In fact, I live a half a block from where I grew up now. So I've been in this community for 75 years, and it was always a pleasure representing home, and nobody had to tell me about what's going on in the neighborhood because I knew I lived here. I raised 2 kids here. And so I enjoyed the job. But it all started with a guy named Richard Barnett. And there are those who know some political history. Richard was a political volunteer, a political operative. He was, I would call, the guru of independent politics on the west side of Chicago. Richard was the guy that was around. In fact, many people think about independent politics, they think about Hyde Park. But in North Lawndale and on the west side, we elected an independent state senator with the help of Richard Barnett and Senator Earlene Collins. We had an independent state rep over here named Jesse Madison, who went on to serve during Harold's administration. In fact, he and Harold served together in Springfield, but Jesse was an independent state rep from the west side of Chicago. And so we had independent politics going on over here long before people thought about politics on the west side. In fact, we were always considered the plantation. And in fact, I think the mayor, when Kennedy won, he addressed his winning as a result of elections that came out of the 24th Ward. That has been my home base all my life. When I first came back from college, I wasn't necessarily bragging on 24th Ward or any of these wards over here. Was not really thinking about politics. I majored in business administration in college. When I came home, but Richard was my little league baseball coach. So that's how my relationship with him started. And then he went on to be my campaign manager, served for my campaign manager for my entire 30-year career in politics. Never one time charging me a nickel. I can't think of anybody that ran on as an independent thinking person that Richard ever charged them. He was a postal worker that was concerned and wanted to see change. When Jesse Madison, who I consider myself replacing, decided not to run after 2 terms, Richard said, well, why don't you run for state rep? At that time, I was working for Bernard Carey. Richard Barnett also supported Bernard Carey. Bernard was the first Republican, probably the last Republican state's attorney. And that was as a result of the Hanrahan. He beat Hanrahan, and I need not go into the Hanrahan and the whole Panther regime. But Carey won. I graduated from college, and when I graduated, Richard said, why don't you, I was looking for a job. I went over to Carey's office, and I got hired as an investigator for the state's attorney's office. And it was a great job. I was dealing with white-collar crime. I learned a lot about government, not just government, but just a lot in general in terms of being in law enforcement. But to make a long story short, after 6 years in the state's attorney's office, Jesse Madison decided that he wasn't running again. And I told Richard, I'm tired of this law enforcement piece. We're only locking up black folks, and this ain't making sense to me. And I said, I want to do something different. He said, why don't you run for state rep? I did, all I knew about state rep was Jesse Madison. There was a citizen search committee that got together to find somebody to replace them. There were 6 people that submitted their name. With the help of Richard and a few others, I was able to get up to speed on most of the issues affecting our community. I found out that was just life for me. But the search committee selected me over 6 other people. I ran first term, I lost. Barnett and I decided, look, you run again 2 years later. When I came in was the same year that they decided to do what they call the cutback amendment, to reduce the House size from 177 to 59. And this was all part of a Pat Quinn citizens referendum where they felt that they need to reduce the House size. That's a whole nother show that I could tell you about that politics, but that's how I got in. My first term in my first election, and I came in with the great Monica Faith Stewart. I hear that she's going to be on the panel today. But Monica and I were probably the two youngest state reps to be elected at that time. In fact, I know I was, and I'm certain she was. We came in, my first term, I voted with the Republicans on the Republican map. And this is in consultation with Mayor Washington and some others, but they were drawing the map and they were reducing the House size. The fear was that they were going to take one of our Black congressional seats. And I told the Speaker and all the Democrats that I was not voting on any map that was going to reduce any Black congressional seats, nor did I think we should lose any legislative seats. Just fast forward, I voted for the map. Monica voted for the map. The map failed in the Senate. And as a result, it went to a draw of the hat and a Democratic map won. I was defeated after my first term, that election, that immediate election. Harold, in fact, came on the West Side and campaigned for me during that time. He and I was in discussion as we were talking about the maps. And I told him that ultimately they were not going to eliminate the Black congressional seats, but they were going to reduce the House size. We had not lost population in the city. And I said, I'm not voting for a map that takes away any Blacks. The Republicans presented a map with our help. The Republican map passed, as I said, it failed. I lost. Harold campaigned for me to try to get reelected. I lost that general election because for whatever reason, I lost. I came home that spring. Harold, the movement picked Harold to run for mayor. I worked for Harold on the West Side of Chicago. I was the guy that fought tooth and nail whenever there was a poster or a button available to try to get them distributed throughout the West Side. My alderman at the time, who was a guy named Bill Henry. Bill Henry was the alderman for the 24th Ward. He backed Jane Byrne in the election. 2 weeks before the election, he had a heart attack. Well, Harold Button was all over town, and Bill, I think, could see the writing. But the long and short is, Jane won. And on the night that she won, because Bill had, prior to that, had became the state rep, he called Harold, and the three of us listened as Bill told Harold, I'm going to send Art Turner to Springfield to take my place. I'm going to come home to be the alderman, because Walter Shumpert, who was the alderman, had passed away. And with Bill's okay and Harold saying okay, I came back to Springfield to be sworn in, and on the podium, people were looking, how's this Democrat? What are you doing back here? I told him I went to the Harold Washington Institute of Political Education, and here I am. And I served 29 years later consecutively after that, and I can go on in terms of how we moved up. But the most important, the thing that I remember most that first term with coming back was that after Harold was elected, there was a big onsurge to take political power that the mayor traditionally had. They wanted to change everything, one being the Park District. And in fact, Jesse Madison went on and became the Park District czar. But in Springfield, they tried to pass legislation to take over the Park District. They did the same thing with the Board of Ed. They wanted to take those powers away from the mayor. And so I found that first term after I got back, it was all defense, trying to stop what they were trying to do in the city council, changing and taking power away from the mayor. He talked with me, as he did with others in Springfield, on a regular basis in terms of what might be happening there. It was a very successful year for us. It was still a battle and never stopped. And then unfortunately, he had an untimely passing. But the reason I got my 29 years was that the fact that I had the support of Mayor Washington and the support of my community for that entire time. And I remained independent through that entire time. And it's one that I retired with the knowing that I stood for the community. And it was from standing with guys like Harold Washington and serving and counseling with him that just kind of reminded me that, hey, it moves on, doesn't stop, and things will be all right.
All right. All right, thank you so much. I want to play a few more clips, and this is coming from the interview that Harold Washington did with Joel Bailey 14 days before his untimely demise, talking about his legacy and his journey to the office of mayor.
Among other things, now hear me, an appreciation for a process. Democracy is not a goal. It's not so many pounds of this or ounces of that. Democracy is a process which is designed to bring out the broadest possible spectrum of opinion for the purpose of making public policy and decisions. I wasn't groomed for mayor. I was assistant corporation counsel. I was a secretary to an alderman. I was a state senator. I was a state representative. I was a congressman. I came up through the machine, broke and went independent. I've been dealing with budgets and appropriations and personnel and departmental heads all my life. That's the background.
I proudly and humbly accept, on behalf of the people of Chicago, the nomination as the Democratic candidate for mayor in 1983.
Unfortunately, in this city and in many others, people unfortunately take the easy way out. They want someone to tell them what to do, and that's the worst thing in the world. We have tried to reinstitute this conception of a process by which you arrive at decisions, and it's taking on. More and more people are becoming involved in the process of government. The trouble with Chicago, it is retarded. Other cities have moved away from us. Our legacy is one of clout, and we still think of it, and it's killing us. We've got to get away from it. And we've got to stop imposing that kind of a truncated thinking on the leaders. This leader's not going to buy it because he knows that's not the way to run things. But that is the way to do it through that process. Look at the Educational Summit. Watch as this whole parent council matter unfolds, and you will see my idea about how cities should be run in terms of solving serious problems. That's the legacy I want to leave. It goes without saying I want an open government. I want institutions that work. I want people to come together and work cooperatively and interdependently with each other and all those kinds of things. But fundamentally and basically, you've got to get people into an idea of working together through an ordered system of give and take.
So he brought them into the process, is your legacy.
Yes.
That's what many of us who had the privilege of being around during the early days learned about what government is about. Governing is not, it's not easy. And Harold exemplified that, you know, he understood that, but he certainly understood how government worked. I mean, I don't know that we can say that there was anybody who had the broad spectrum of experience in coming into his time as mayor, that all of those other experiences, but one must have the conviction that he had in his character and in his conscience and certainly in his courage to carry that out beyond his obvious intelligence and his ability and his ability to effectively communicate to everybody across the board. He didn't talk to so high above people that they couldn't understand him. And he certainly didn't condescend to talk beneath people to assume that they could not understand him. I just admire who he was, and I try to imitate who he was and what he did and the work that I do every day. And I think that we need to make sure that our young people coming along, and even some of our older people who don't quite get it, understand what that commitment to service really looks like.
I think that I had heard, I think at some point, that Harold's father was a minister. And Harold grew up in the church, and he was very involved in ward politics from a very early age. And then you throw in the professional attributes that add to it in terms of his educational background, but no question about it. He was an effective communicator. He could speak to everybody on any street corner and any, there was nobody that Harold could not talk to and could not communicate with. And that combination, I think, of the upbringing between the church and everything else just made him who he was. He was one of a kind. I met him, later in life here on the West Side. But, as I decided to take that fight on, fighting the party, I had Harold calling me at night saying, look, man, it's going to be all right. You're doing, you're okay where you're at. And he knew the players that I was dealing with. So he said, oh, Burke, I know Burke, or I know Mike Madigan, I know this guy. We grew up in the Young Democrats together. So he knew them.
Yeah.
They were much, as I said, I came in at 29 years old. I didn't have a clue. But Harold and Richard, between having those two, Harold the politician and Richard the strategist, saying, look, we can make it go. And it was, as I say, the best time of my life. I tell people I had the greatest job on earth. I just worked with a few clowns.
Mark, may I say something? Quickly, I just want to say what Art was talking about his father. When I mentioned Harold, when he was in over in the Third War, he was also precinct captain there. Right. And Harold's father was the precinct captain there when Harold was young. And so when you talk about Harold, not only was he so talented, he was truly chosen to do that. I mean, people are chosen to do certain things. God put them in the right place at the right time. He was the man. He had the walk. He had the talk. He could combat. He was a veteran. He knew the people. He knew the lounges. He knew the churches. I mean, he had such a charisma about him. He would even tell the populations that were not even supportive of him. When we would campaign with him, I know he had that group already. He would go in the non-minority community. Art, even those people they said they were going to vote for him, he would say, that's okay. He said, I'm going to love you anyway. I mean, people that would normally never even touch Black folks through the city of Chicago. It was clearly racially divided compared to what you're seeing today. It was not like that. The borderlines when I was growing up over in Inglewood are basically the same, I'll be 84, and it has not changed that much. So we're going to keep you on, Mark. When we get through with you, you're going to be a historian, just like Harold taught us. And one other thing to point out, when we were appointed, he didn't just put you in office. You had to go through a training. You just didn't get appointed. We had to go through a training as deputies. So we knew his philosophy so that we could support it and speak it as he wanted us to. So, I'm honored to be here from Miami to Chicago. Politics? Oh, Lord Jesus. We're going to have a good time.
It's been a great 40 years. Thank you so much. I certainly appreciate that. One thing that we certainly know, Lois Dean, that Harold Washington, as prepared as he was, I can only imagine that he insisted that anybody who worked with him, and certainly in his administration, needed to be prepared.
Needed to be prepared. That was the thing. When I got appointed, and he said, I don't know anything about personnel, because at that time it was called personnel. He said, yeah, you do, because you fired some volunteers and you took care of all the volunteers in the campaign. So you go over there and do what you did before. You'll be all right. So that's what happened.
Yeah. All right, now we have our last group, and man, these 2 hours, I knew they were going to fly by when we were talking about something as dynamic as this individual and as much as he means to all of us. Harold Washington, again, I reiterate, I've never had the privilege of meeting him, but I felt like this is somebody whom I've known, and certainly felt like there was somebody who cared about me, and I have been passionate about following him, and certainly doing all that I can to work with those people such as Lois Dean. It was actually Josie Childs who I first met. Josie Childs, when I was redeveloping the Grand Ballroom on 63rd and Cottage Grove, she actually and took me over to the University of Chicago and got the president of the University of Chicago to make sure that they had events at the ballroom. that's how I came to know Josie Childs, and she has been a great
Mm-hmm.
supporter of me, and certainly I was very, very close with her, and she got to, she was vacillating as to who she was going to vote for in this last mayoral campaign.
Election. Yeah.
In the election, and she called me actually 2 nights before, and she was able to get her ballot out. That
Ballot.
she
Yes.
sent her ballot by mail that she voted for Brandon Johnson. At the time, she was still going through that, and that was the last time that I was able to speak to her. I spoke to her almost on a daily basis. That she would call because she was so passionate about Harold Washington, and certainly about the Harold Washington Legacy Committee, as we shall carry that on. All right, our next group of panelists, I think, that are here, Sasha Dalton. She hasn't connected just yet, but
I don't think she's going to be able to connect, Mark. So
okay, all right.
She's still trying.
Monica? Okay, is Monica Faith Stewart here? Do we have Monica?
Let's see. It should be Monica and who? And Devorah.
We have Anton Seals. Is Devorah here with us? Let's see if she has connected. I don't see Devorah yet, so maybe she will join us. But we will move right ahead. I'm going to play a couple of more clips so that the audience can see. Here is Harold Washington, who was doing this interview. Now, this was an interview that was done by, I think, I forget the one's name. Here's Devorah, who she has just done.
Okay, there she is.
Yeah. All right. So we have Devorah Crable and Elder Anton Seals both with us. I'm going to get to you in just a few minutes. I want to play a few more of these clips.
There seemed to be an allegation on your part, and please stop me if I'm wrong, that the white press, the mainstream press, if you will, could never be responsive to the needs, aspirations, and political aims of the black community. I was present a couple of years ago at a TV Academy function. Do you remember the luncheon where you and Mr. Walter Jacobson of Channel 2 went at it in no uncertain terms? At that time, you said that the white press could not possibly report accurately on what was happening in a black administration.
I didn't say anything of the sort. I said that the institution of the media was so structured that it could not respond to the needs of women, Hispanics, or blacks, because the composition of it was such that it couldn't understand those elements. I didn't say anything about white. I said, for example, you found very few women or blacks or Hispanics in editorial boards, very few, if any, in sales, practically none of these three elements in production. Working reporters, a pittance. Anchormen or women, very few. That's what I said. This is manifestly true. It had nothing to do with white and black. I was being the advocate for a sensible, reasonable inculcation and incorporation of three elements into the vast institution called the media. Not print, not electronic, but media. That was my position. Mr. Jacobson was irrelevant to the whole thing until he injected himself into it by saying, give me proof. And I said, well, you're at the bottom of the barrel. I'm not even concerning myself with you. I'm concerning myself with a pattern in one of the major decision and perception-forming institutions in this country called the media. That was my point. But it disturbs me that it was so totally warped, even after only a short period of 2 years. I have not been at odds with the media. It is always wise as a political leader to state your position clearly and let the chips fall where they may. And I would like to think that the media as an institution perhaps sees that. There are some very, very obvious exceptions. If you're saying to me that the chief executive of a city of 3 million with a budget of 1.8 billion, one of the most powerful economic-based cities in the world, a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-linguistic city,
should kowtow to any interest group, then I say to you, you missed the significance of this job.
No, I certainly wouldn't
I have
say.
a tremendous respect for the First Amendment. As a matter of fact, I consider myself one of the major defenders of it, but not a slave to it, and certainly not a slave to the recipients of it.
That was Harold Washington.
That was Harold. That was Harold.
My God.
And
Yes,
we'll
sir.
never see another one like him again. And you know, it was very interesting because when I came here, I came from Washington, D.C., the home of another very charismatic, extraordinarily brilliant mayor who was beloved by everyone, working on the same agenda as Harold Washington. You might remember for his memorial services were broadcast book into book, I believe 3 days nonstop. That was like how beloved he was. So, and Harold Washington was right there in step with him. I got to give a special hug and embrace my dear friend and seminary colleague, Anton Seals. How are you, my brother?
God bless you. God bless you. Good to see you.
Yeah, good
Amen.
to see you too. And Mark and Lois Steen, come on. You all were my and my drum majors all during the Democratic National Convention, trying to get folks registered and out there to vote. And I just want a very special thank you for that effort.
Elder Steels, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What was your involvement with Harold Washington?
Well, I've been listening to the whole program basically, and all through the process tonight. Unlike today, talking about where we are now, we don't have that spirit. That it was a spirit of camaraderie. There was a spirit of I think Jackie Grimshaw said collectiveness or collaborative. There was a coming together of pride in the African community that I had at that age, 30 some years old, I had never, at 32, going on 33, I had never experienced. The blessing was, and I have to thank Lois Steen and sister, help me out. Sasha Dawson. Inviting me to be on. And Mark, it's a pleasure to meet you. But they experienced it. And if it hadn't been for Joe Gardner, I would have never entered into this arena. I left teaching at Hyde Park High School to go and work at Operation Push, at Push with Reverend Jackson. And it was a phenomenal experience, and got involved with voter registration and the Operation Push family in terms of the broader community and what was going on. There was such a movement of people coming together because of Harold. And it moved from, we want Harold. He said, you want Harold? You got Harold.
Got him.
It was magnetic. It was, there was no question he was intellectual, but he was with the Mau-Maus too. I mean, he was just down to earth. And I had the privilege of not working in, I worked at the city, ended up, it was called, I think, Department of Neighborhoods. And we put on the first neighborhood festival. We were boycotting the festival down there by Navy Pier. You all remember that?
Yes.
Operation Push would always boycott the festival. It was little small areas, not there now. It's been reconstructed. But it was amazing, Mark, because we were able to galvanize people. And I had never been in politics, never been in a position of that kind of interacting with so many people from so many areas, and going out and doing the campaign and meeting with people. And Gutierrez, he was the first elected Hispanic congressperson because of Harold. And I remember going out to meet him. But Mayor Washington was just, even right now, the effectiveness of his life, his legacy, and I'm 75 this October. And Lestine, my auntie Rita Posey and Gwen, they're friends. They told me to say hello. But and Deborah, we've been through the battle. We've seen things. We've seen where we are today is we don't have that camaraderie as love and the spirit of togetherness in our community, in our families. And there's never been a movement. When Harold Washington won the election, I remember going down on, what was that, by McCormick Place, where it was a big hotel. And it was Mark, there were so many people in there. To this day, I believe the building was swaying.
It was.
It was that powerful. And to put together the neighborhood festival, and people were coming. And not only did we do it at, I think it was at, somebody help me out, it was Washington Park. And there were so many people and contractors that Budweiser sponsored it just to honor Harold Washington. And, you know, the politics and all that. I wasn't in that. I was just bringing people together. That was my assignment. How do we organize and bring people together to honor Mayor Harold Washington? And then take that motto and duplicate it across the city. So we did like 13 festivals. And the Department of Planning took it over. But it was just a joy to be in that atmosphere. It was electric, it was magnetic, and it was heartfelt. And I don't think the only thing came closer to that may have been Obama's election. But in Chicago, until when he passed, and it divided our community, because we don't understand the power of the authority of the seat of the mayor, whoever it is, and you have an African-American mayor, like or not, that tore our communities, and we have not. When you walked in, Mark, and Lestine, when we walked in, and Monica, we walked into City Hall, there was a whole different climate change. It was like we belong here. You know, it wasn't a feeling, and you still had the racial issues, but because there was this spirit. I remember getting approved to create these pictures. Hey, Sasha, to create these T-shirts that had the spirit of Chicago on those T-shirts. And as fast as the city could pay for them and make them, it was just a wonderful experience being able to work with so many people that put their lives aside, their personal lives, to sacrifice. And as you said, Harold wasn't about just African American people. It was a people's movement. And I don't think Chicago's experienced that since. And so I honor that. It made me shake.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left, but I want to make sure that we hear from Monica Faith Stewart, and Sasha just joined us, so we're going to go over to you. Monica, good to see you.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here. It's good to help celebrate a wonderful occasion, certainly I would say for all Chicago. It's something for us to commemorate Harold's birthday. I was the field coordinator in the primary in 1983, and it was a challenge. It was just a mind-blowing experience. Harold had a charm about him, and a warmth that people gravitated to him. When he would say, "You want Harold?" and he knew that people wanted him. You got Harold. And the earlier this evening, in another discussion about the significance of Harold's election, they also made the comment about the unity in our community that we have not experienced since. And it was a wonderful thing to experience. And also, it was so unlike today's Chicago, where you know, I mean, it was a different in that economy. You had all the black millionaires, you know, the black business people, but every community, I mean, for every sector, people were united to elect Harold. Now, yes, there are the machine minions who, you know, were with Jane Byrne, but and on a mass level, people there was a sense of unity. And Anton, you made a comment about we haven't experienced since, and I just want it. Harold Sutton transition, his sudden death, left us just we were not prepared for a post Harold season, and we had not integrated the lessons that we should have learned from the experience of campaigning and winning that first campaign for Harold. One thing, a basic lesson was that you can't have two major black candidates and expect for one of them to win. To not come together and make strategic decisions about who was going to succeed Harold. And consequently, for 40 years, we were in the desert. We were, wandering in the wilderness. And look at the cost. Look at the cost of years of daily. Look at the cost of what Rahm Emanuel cost our community. And what I am saying is that these things are important, that we should pay attention and have a sense of the common good, have a sense of what our community needs and where we're going, and always be willing to put that before ego, before my own little private whatever I want to see happen, because it's too important.
Yeah.
And
let me stop you right there, Monica. Okay, because
sure.
I want to get Sasha in. Sasha, you need to unmute yourself. Your microphone is muted, and I want to get her to chime in here just a little bit so that we can have everybody's input. We only have a few minutes left. Did we lose Sasha?
Yes.
Herself off.
I think she tried to unmute herself.
Okay. Yeah, she did connect her. Go ahead.
Can I just say this, Mark?
Go right ahead.
Okay, before we cut off, I just want to say, because we've touched on a whole lot of stuff in the last 2 hours, but we want to give credence to all the black businesses that did help Harold when the time came that we needed. And like Monica said, we came together, unity in the community. And I want to give credence to Dolores Woods, especially because she is the reason, Harold's former secretary, the reason, and me and her used to battle about our names being the same. She said, when you gonna get married so you can stop you Lois Woods, I'm the Lois Woods. But anyway, she's the reason that she told Josie that we needed to make sure that Harold's name and his legacy is remembered. And this is how it all came about. And we went to Josie and Dolores went to the library, and that's, we start this annual thing about his birthday, and we got to make sure that stays on track. And then give credence to Josie for starting the Harold Washington Legacy Committee, and to Sasha, she cut herself off, but Harold gave her those two first big jobs, that the big breakfast and the Unity breakfast and the Gospel Fest.
And the Gospel Fest.
The Gospel Fest. And then to carry us on through these years, we've had Juliana Richardson, Hermine Hartman, Art Norman. These are the people that have helped us with this unity in the community, that we're here and continuing, and Devorah right here with the people to know who Harold is and was. But the black businesses in 1982 and 1983, You could not turn us around. And that's how we moved on to where we were. And I'll end it with, as we move forward with anything that we do, we messed up because we cannot vote with our heart. We cannot try to reason with politics with our heart. That's how we had those two candidates. And I didn't learn this until 10 years later. It was too late. You gotta vote with your head and what the numbers are. Harold taught us about numbers. You got to know what your numbers are before we go, try to delve into anything else, because the number is what's going to make you get where you got to go, not your heart. And here's
not only do we have to, yes, not only do we need to know what our numbers are, but we have to make our numbers. We have the numbers here, and we have to collaborate and build our numbers so that we institutionalize a foundation that we can make the determination to make sure that there is equitable representation of all of those areas in our communities, from education to economics. Go ahead, Monica.
Well, I also think we need to teach our children, teach our young people. I know one thing in the last election, I kept hearing, I should say the last mayoral election, when if someone said something positive about Brandon, and in terms of he reminds me of Harold or something, then other people, young people would say, I don't even know who, I never, they didn't know Harold at all.
Harold Washington Elementary School. They don't know who Harold Washington was.
Oral tradition is supposed to be people. We need to remind people, we have to carry forward the stories. We need to teach. And because all of us are getting old, and the lessons that we learn from that experience, the young people need to know if we're going to survive, if we're going to stand down and resist and overcome the experience that we're about to go through with Washington. Not Harold, but
right.
And I will agree with you, Monica, and I think that it's very important that not only this is the last living generation that will be able to tell the story of voting rights and our fight to gain our right to vote. So it is imperative that on every platform that is available to you, that you share those stories. It is very important that we have that civics education that you're talking about. And it doesn't happen in the schools. It happens in the home. One of the things that I am encouraging through the Know Your Power, Be Vote Ready initiative, while we're in this mean time between the next general election, and mean underscoring that we have to deal with this commander in chaos, is for us to pull in the reins. You can go to this website and you can get QR codes to every voter registration page in the country. I invite people to bring your families together online and have a voter registration party and share those stories online. It's very easy to do. Technology is now our friend. And the two things too, and Anton, I'm so glad that you did bring it up. It was President Barack Obama who took a page out of Harold Washington's book. The one thing they both did is that they made the electorate, the stakeholders in their future. They both made sure that the people understood, the electorate understood that their voice matters and they are the ones that make the difference. And that difference is made through your ballot, through your voice is expressed through that ballot, which is why you have to be registered. Because that first step in being able to, as you said in one of the clips earlier, Mark, this is something that you have to participate. He says, get involved with the process, is what I heard Harold Washington say. You got to be involved in the process. You got to engage that debate. You can't expect everyone to be on the same page, but it's all about consensus building. You figure out what's going to work and you drive that agenda once you have that consensus. And that's what is required from it.
All right, listen. All right, listen, we're coming up towards the close of we're going to carry on a little bit further, but we're coming up to a close of the broadcast on intellectualradio.com. We want to thank intellectualradio.com for allowing us to broadcast this special edition of the People Show. Emma Young has just joined us, and we're going to get her input after we watch this clip. I want to thank you all for tuning in on intellectual.com, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We're going to carry it over, continues on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram right after this.
The trouble with Chicago, it is retarded. Other cities have moved away from us. Our legacy is one of clout, and we still think of it, and it's killing us. We've got to get away from it. And we've got to stop imposing that kind of a truncated thinking on the leaders. This leader's not going to buy it because he knows that's not the way to run things. But that is the way to do it through that process. Look at the Educational Summit. Watch as this whole parent council matter unfolds, and you will see my idea about how cities should be run in terms of solving serious problems. That's the legacy I want to leave. It goes without saying I want an open government. I want institutions that work. I want people to come together and work cooperatively and interdependently with each other and all those kinds of things. But fundamentally and basically, you've got to get people into an idea of working together through an ordered system of give and take.
So he brought them into the process is your legacy.
Yes.
Yes. There it is. That's what we all have to learn from. I think that we, when I first started doing this on WVON, the first time that I did it, we had a week of Harold, and every night for 3 hours we had a different group of people that came on that was a part of the administration, a part of the campaign, even his security team, to really paint the picture of what Harold represented through all these different facets of people who were involved in that really reflected the broader community. Even though most of those people were Black, it still represented all of Chicago. Harold Washington, to me, was somebody who, because he didn't have to come out and say that he was a Black man, we knew that he was a Black man. But he also made sure that the Black community was equitably represented in his vision of his administration, and he had his deputy mayors and his people in his cabinets to carry out those initiatives to make sure that we're not going to just be for the Black community, but we're going to make sure that the Black community gets its fair share. And I think that that inclusiveness of what Harold represented has not been represented since Harold, even though we've had now 4 Black mayors since Harold. We still have not seen the spirit of what Harold Washington represented in my opinion, in terms of the administrations. It still has, it's becoming that cliquish, good old boys network that people don't feel included in the process.
It's
well, Mark,
very reflective.
I also think
go ahead.
That people from the ground earlier, Emma we were talking about Come Alive October 5. So people had to make a decision. If you want a Black mayor, there's something that you have to do. You have to register to vote. And so there was an ownership of the campaign. The campaign wasn't it was an organic kind of growth that there wasn't a them and us. It was all of us. And I remember being downtown, if you had on a button and non-Black people who had on a button, they would look and smile. And there is that sense of, we are, and it was just a wonderful feeling. Mm-hmm. That, and that kind of positive, not negative, not in spite of, or just, a real coming together. And that's what was, to me, special and beautiful about
And
that.
Harold Washington was a very polished man who had, I mean, his professional expertise, his leadership, his age. He had grown. I take age out of it because you don't have to be 60 years old to be able to lead. But the wisdom, the knowledge, the understanding is critical. But also, what's critical is what all of us are talking about. We have to go back and educate our communities. We've got to go back and teach and make sure they understand what we've accomplished. I mean, I listened today to Jackie Grimshaw, and I forgot the other young lady that was on, First Deputy Development, and she was talking about Lucille Dobbins, all the opportunities for economic development. I don't know if we've had that massive kind of development in our communities since that era. But those that kind of and they led in with the fact that it wasn't just Lucille, it wasn't just Jackie, it was a collaborative mindset of a brilliant man who understood how to bring people together.
Right.
Bob Starks, I mean, God bless you, bro. All that work that these men and women put into behind the scenes, these weren't all the people with the big names. This was grassroots movement. But
Right.
there was a man that God appointed and anointed to do what Harold Washington
That's right.
did. And we have to, faith-based as we are in our community, and I bet not end without saying this. Until we draw closer to God, we're getting what we got in America because people chose who the president is. And
all right, let me get some
Harold
of the other
Washington is critical. That model, I pray God would reproduce that, not reproduce, but send forth that kind of leadership. I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
All right. Let's get Emma Young, who is in with us. I want to get her comments in, and then I brought the other panelists back on because we can carry this conversation on. We're going to do this again, Lois Thien. I think that one of the things that is important to me is that we don't do one-offs, but we're going to have to find a way. Just make the decision that we do this in terms of creating a platform to educate our community, whether we do this once every quarter, but we're going to have to develop our own model for making sure that we keep the lessons of Harold Washington's alive and institutionalize that way above, beyond us when our time comes, but that these lessons continue on. And so while we have time to do it, then we're going to continue to do that. So we'll find a way to continue to use this platform to carry those messages forward. Emma.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm loving the conversation. And as you said, there was a sense of unity, and it came not only from Harold, but it came from the people. At that time, Anna Langford, Roland Burris, Richard Newhouse, they were all thinking of running for mayor. But when we decided on Harold, we had the plebiscites, and he was drafted, although we knew before the plebiscites that's who we wanted. They all came behind it. They all, Richard Newhouse, the night before Harold announced his candidacy, me and Renaud and Chuck Colbert and Richard Newhouse and Mayor Washington were up in his place on 79th and Cottage, working all night on his speech. Even though Richard had been a candidate, he became one of his greatest advocates as did Roland, as did Anna. Everybody got behind, and the community got behind him. So basically, everybody said, and I agree with what Monica, where did Monica go? That, you know, and it was not about putting our, you know, personal thing in ahead of us, but the good of the community, and that's what the politicians were doing too.
Right. Matt, could we ask one question? Who came up with the phrase "Come Alive October 5"?
Oh, shut up, Bob. We already said it.
We got the answer to that question. Listen, I want to thank every one of you all for coming on. Dr. Barbara Norman, Robert Stocks, Lucille Dobbins, Emma Young, Monica Faith Stewart, Devora Crable, Elder Anton Seals, and Lois Dean. Thank you for putting together this great panel. We're going to do this again, and we're going to keep
good.
Yeah,
our children need this.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so each
we're coming out with a book, y'all. You know, for the voices from the community and for our kids.
All right. Wonderful.
Yes.
Let me mark.
Really
let me just
know they don't know as much as they should know about Harold Washington.
Right, and we're not gonna resolve it all tonight. So
yeah.
Right.
Right.
2 hours.
Mark
Okay.
for the
Well,
panel.
Thank you very much.
Let me just
Lord.
say, one of Harold's remember one of his initiative was get an elected school board. We finally got there. Look how many years it took.
Right.
So with this group collectively working with him and that board can put some of the curriculum back in place. Because if we don't get to the young people to help teach and educate them,
yes,
we are responsible and accountable to do that. You cannot expect others to do that. So that would be one of your challenges as you prepare your future for this program.
All right. All right. Thank you all very much. I certainly appreciate your time. We're going to do it again. Thank you so much. Happy birthday to Harold Washington, 103 years old. We love you. And we are going to continue on your birthday. All right. Good night, everybody.
That's right. Thank you. Good night, dear.
Good night.